evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Paul Brown Show. This evening, my guest will be Mr. Kareem Puranda. How you doing there, sir?
What's going on, man? How you doing?
Great. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Certainly. I'm a native of Bronx, New York. Made my way down south to play college football at Livingstone College.
Okay.
Became a police officer for a number of years, 8 years to be specific, and then decided to transition into counseling, where now I am a licensed professional counselor in the state of North Carolina.
How long have you been a counselor?
Going on 4 years now.
What made you want to get into that type of field, counseling?
I want to say that counseling chose me instead of me choosing it.
Okay.
It's a profession where I believe I've always been called to help people who hurt, and I think that desire or ambition came out of my own hurts, that I wanted to help others who were struggling like I was when I was growing up.
In counseling, what does it take to be an effective counselor?
Definitely you have to have empathy. You have to have an ability to understand another person's plight that's not your own, and be able to recognize how you can help them help themselves. It's about being totally neutral, unbiased, and being able to look at every human being as having a purpose or a greater good to provide to everyone else.
Okay. What population do you offer counseling for?
My primary population is law enforcement.
Okay.
Law enforcement officers, people in the criminal justice system, correctional officers, probation officers, federal agents, state agents, even attorneys, because that profession, coming from it, transitioning out of that profession, I recognize that there's a lot of stress, a lot of burnout that officers especially contend with on a daily basis, and a lot of that stuff goes unaddressed. And I think that they need a lot of support that they're not getting.
Being and prior working in the field of law enforcement, I know you said counseling. Do you think that officers really like telling things like what is expected in being a counseling? You know what I'm saying?
I think that's a great question, Paul. One of the adversaries of counseling when it comes to working with a population like law enforcement is the law enforcement culture. And what I mean by that is that the law enforcement culture suggests that police officers have the ability through their training to withstand any type of emotional challenges that they may encounter. And the reality is that human beings put on the uniform, and all human beings struggle with some form of emotional challenges here and there, whether it be stress or losing a loved one or suffering any kind of loss. People respond to those things, but the law enforcement culture suggests that police officers, because of the uniform and what it represents, they can handle those things without the professional help, as in a mental health assistance.
As a prior officer, how do you kind of like live that lifestyle, whereas you kind of have to determine whether this person has your goodness in nature or whether they want to harm you?
It's extremely challenging. It's a profession where, and this is one of the things I want to help officers uncover or sort of unmask while they hide it behind the uniform. It's this idea that you carry yourself everywhere you go. All your experiences, everything you've ever been exposed to accompanies you wherever you go, unless you have the awareness and the wherewithal to understand that there are challenges. Many officers and people in general tend to deny the things that make them vulnerable in order to remain as if they have it all under control, and that hurts them more than it helps them. And what happens is, there's this thing called bias and profiling, where, the media and certain outlets that condition the mind to believe that a certain type of people are a certain type of way based upon the way they are presented in the media. And I think that some of these things condition all of us to assume that a certain type of population, a certain type of clothing, a certain type of attire, a certain type of mannerism is equated to criminality when it's really not.
When an officer shoots someone or kills someone in their going out there doing it, how does that affect them not only mentally but in future going out there doing the same thing?
Certainly. I think I can only imagine. I've never taken a life, so I really can't speak from a firsthand perspective, but I can only imagine that the idea of going through an experience like that is traumatic. It's It's impactful not only to the officer, his family, but also or her family, but also the community as well, because there was a loss of life. And considering the historical interpretation or perception of the uniform and what it means to people of color as it relates to America's history, and it becomes very challenging to navigate that thing. And I think if we don't have a discussion, an honest discussion about the perspectives, it remains something, the pink elephant in the room, if you will.
Okay. So how would you, as a prior officer, be able to deal with the counseling of that individual? You know what I'm saying? How does he come to you? I mean, what do you expect him to really, because he's not going to tell you everything.
Sure.
So what, as a counselor, would you want him to tell you to kind of like make him get a little better?
Sure. One of the things that as a counselor I tend to do is meet people where they are and roll with their resistance. It's a term that they use under motivational interviewing. And people are very vulnerable about their vulnerabilities. They're very intimidated, afraid, insecure, if you will. And my goal is to help them lower that vulnerability and increase their courage in those areas to be able to share. Now, being prior law enforcement and knowing what it looks like behind the badge, if you will, and understanding a lot of the challenges that officers deal with that they don't talk about, I have an advantage perhaps over some therapists because of my understanding of the profession.
Correct.
And the law enforcement culture. And so, I tackle those things uniquely. I have actually developed a self-help guide for officers who are, in fact, somewhat leery about seeing a mental health professional, that they can utilize this self-help guide independently to help them address some of the unawareness that they may be dealing with that drives their behavior. But the reality is an officer chooses to use force at that particular moment because he felt or she felt that there was an imminent danger or an imminent threat that they interpreted at the moment. And it's hard to legislate or armchair quarterback what an officer believes they saw or what they interpreted at that time from the lens of a camera. And this is where I think the debate becomes very tense, or the tug of war intensifies, because people will look at it from the TV screen, and it's totally different when you're right there on the scene, whatever the conditions were. So it's hard to interpret.
Okay, in today's society, we see a lot of depth from most of the time a white officer to a black individual. Do you feel like there is a sense of fear from that white officer toward that black individual, or as compared to another white, or a black officer to a white individual? Is there something about that black individual that you feel that officers fear?
That's a great question. What I can say to that is that in BLET, basic law enforcement training, there's there are videos that sort of have been added to the training when I came through back in 2002 that were designed for shock value. These videos entailed a police officer's life being taken by a suspect, unassuming suspect, one who didn't appear to have any qualities of causing danger or harm to the officer. But by the end of the video, the officer was ambushed and killed. And so these videos are shown in BLET, as well as these other videos called shoot or don't shoot videos, to condition the officer to go home the same way he came on duty. So there is a sense of hypervigilance, or a sense of being extra alert, which also causes stress and burnout over time towards threats. And it's oftentimes, where are your hands located? What are you reaching for? Show me your hands. And then that idea of not complying creates the space of the unknown that causes an officer to respond impulsively or according to his training. And the only person that can be honest about that is the officer themselves, whether it was an impulsive response to what they perceived and thought to be a threat, or if it was attributed to their training. And the reality is that profiling does exist. You have a lot of music videos that show gun violence, show a lot of drug usage, or the idea of it glorifies the criminal aspects of some of the culture in some rap music. And officers study these videos. They see these videos. And if they are not conscious, what happens is they take that and they represent it as the truth. And so whenever they see anything that reminds them of that, in regards of it being a point of reference, then they respond to a threat that may not even exist, based upon the mere resemblance to a threat that they once witnessed by TV. It's quite possible.
Okay. Have you ever been in that instance whereas you felt differently toward a black someone, you know what I'm saying, that you're approaching than someone of a different color?
No, I recall when I was in law enforcement, my goal was to treat everybody the same. I was even keeled with everybody. I didn't have the fear or the anxiety or the concerns about my own people, and those are the neighborhoods I primarily worked in, because I came from an environment like that. So it didn't raise as much alarm to me as it would an officer who may have never grown up in that area and only knows what he's heard or she's heard based upon the media or somebody else's belief. The reality is, it's if you don't have an understanding about the people you're working with, or even yourself for that matter, then your environment's going to dictate what you believe. And I think, there are some officers, not all, that patrol according to that rationale. And it hurts them instead of helping them.
Okay. How do you deal with, as a counselor, family members whose wife, husband goes out there and risking their life, not knowing that they will return? How do you think they deal with, how do you counsel someone to deal with that type of lifestyle?
It's impactful. It's also the idea of preparing yourself for what comes with the territory. Especially veterans, our military folks who go overseas. One of the concerns is that they may not come back. Correct. And it's about preparation. You hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst type of thing. And the only thing that can really get people through that is support and the celebration of the person's life, if they in fact, unfortunately, succumb to whatever the circumstances are.
Do you think in a lot of ways we take life for granted?
I do.
That our loved one will always come back, always be there, you know what I'm saying, tomorrow, the day after, not knowing that you may never see them again.
Yeah, I truly believe that. And I think the human mind enjoys creating security and comfort. We chase pleasure and avoid pain. And so it's easy for us to convince ourselves that it won't happen to us, hopefully. And then when it does, it can be even more impactful. But for the most part, I think people do well when they have a positive outlook instead of a negative one, because they save themselves a lot of stress and anxiety in the long run.
I heard you also like counseling youth.
Yes.
Yeah. What inspired you to want to deal with the youth in our community?
I'm very passionate about the youth. One of the things I learned growing up in Bronx, New York, and I grew up in a not so delicate area of the Bronx, is that I didn't have opportunities. And my opportunities were, I was just fortunate because of the scholarship I was able to achieve and play football and get out of the Bronx. But it's one of the things where I know there's a lot of, I don't know what the word is, there's a lot of, there are not that many resources for kids to take advantage of. And so one of the reasons I'm so passionate about working with kids is my ability to create the conditions that will inspire kids to think outside the four corners of their block or the four corners of their hood and recognize that there's more to life than what they see on a daily basis in that tight circumference of a neighborhood. And so I have an organization I founded back in 2012 called Achieving Success on Purpose. It's a nonprofit organization, and what we specialize in is helping children develop social and emotional intelligence. The reason I think these two things are so important is because, number one, you have to know what it is you feel. You have to know what it is in your environment that causes you to feel the way that you feel, and you have to be intelligent about how you deal with those emotions, especially having a vocabulary to express what it is you feel. Many kids don't know how to articulate what they feel. Instead of verbalizing it, they just act out.